Good evening, and thank you to everyone for joining us for our Jewish genealogy workshop focusing on death and burial resources with Rabbi Scott Kalmikoff. That's me. Please know that this program is being recorded. Also, everyone is muted, but we welcome questions and comments in the chat, and we'll do our best to address them at the end of the presentation. My name is Scott Kalmikoff. I happen to be both the coordinator for the Union for Traditional Judaism, and I'm also tonight's presenter. I just have a few remarks before we begin. Thank you to our sponsors for this webinar series, our supporters at the $72 level, Barbara Sachs in honor of Rabbi Stephen Sachs, Juan Mesa-Freidel, and our friend, Rabbi Noah Gradovsky. I'd also like to thank everybody who made a donation along with registering for this program. For those of you who are new to UTJ, let me add a few words of introduction to our organization. The Union for Traditional Judaism is a group of rabbis, scholars, and lay people who advocate for a passionate, open-minded approach to Torah study and observance of Jewish law, rooted in classical religious sources and informed by modern scholarship. Our philosophy is distinguished by the symbiotic relationship between faith in the God-given Torah and intellectual integrity, and our emphasis on the sacred framework of halakha, Jewish law, as our unifying guide. Generally, there's someone who is supposed to introduce the speaker. I'm the speaker tonight. I'm not going to introduce myself. That would be awkward. Let me just admit the rest of the other participants who are in the waiting room, and then we're going to get started. Okay, friends, I'm Scott Kalmikoff. I'm a genealogist from New York City. I'm 31 years old, so at this point I've been conducting genealogical research for the past 15, 16 years. I was not into sports or anything like that as a teenager. I geeked out on genealogy, and it became a hobby, a passion, some would call it an obsession. And during the pandemic, I started conducting genealogical research for private clients. So now people hire me to research their family trees. And I also give these Jewish genealogy presentations for synagogues, JCCs, and other Jewish organizations. So I'm very excited to be with you this evening. Generally, I give like a general overview of Jewish genealogical resources that are online. But tonight, we're going to go in depth speaking about death and burial resources. Death is the last thing that happens in a person's life. And for sake of Jewish genealogy and genealogy in general, death and burial resources are really, really important when conducting genealogical research. And so I want to explore with you tonight all of the resources that there are online that you can use to research your family tree. I really try to show people how to do this for as, I would say, I'm fairly frugal, so I like to keep costs down when conducting genealogical research. How can you do this for as cheap as possible? And how can you do it from the comfort of your own home? There are so many websites that have genealogical resources available at our fingertips. And I think a lot of people just don't know how to access them and how to put all the information together. So that's what I'm going to show you this evening. I'm going to be using my family as part of the presentation tonight, but I'm also going to be using some families as an example, families that I've done research for in the past. So the first thing that I want to say is that Jewish headstones are very, very important when conducting Jewish genealogy. Traditionally, people put their Hebrew name and their father's Hebrew name on a headstone. And so that could be really, really important when you're conducting genealogical research on your ancestors. You might be able to go back another generation just by looking at the headstone and seeing what someone's father's Jewish name was. This is why I encourage people today to put both their father and their mother's Jewish name on a headstone. There were some communities where they did not put the father's name. Sometimes especially for women, they would say that she was the wife of so-and-so. I see this particularly in German-speaking communities and in Sephardic communities where the father's name was not included on the headstone, but the husband's name was. So we're going to speak at length about headstones, how to read headstones, what information might be included on headstones, and we're going to speak about where to find pictures of headstones and things like that as well. So I'm going to share my screen with you. And here are our remarks. Very good. I can exit out of that. And now I'm going to go to Ancestry.com. Ancestry.com and familysearch.org are two websites that I'm on every single day. Ancestry.com, in order to access records on Ancestry.com, you have to pay for a membership in order to access their records. Family Search is a free alternative. It's run by the Church of Latter-day Saints, the Mormons. Family Search and Ancestry.com, a lot of times they have records that overlap. For example, census records, naturalization records, military draft cards. Both websites have these records, but sometimes Family Search will have a set of records that Ancestry doesn't, and vice versa. So I'm constantly going back and forth between Ancestry.com and familysearch.org to conduct genealogical research to find information about my ancestors. My ancestors, as an example, when they came to America, settled in New York City. We're going to speak a little bit at length about New York City and burial and death information for the city of New York. So many Jewish people were living in New York in the first half of the 20th century, so I think it's worthwhile to speak about it. And I'm going to be using my own family as an example for tonight's presentation, okay? So familysearch.org and ancestry.com, both websites have death records in their databases. I'm going to show you, for example, a search that I conducted to find my great-grandfather's death record here in New York City from 1937. So I knew that he had passed away in New York, but I wanted to see what information his death record might have and how that might help me get further back in my family tree. So I conducted a quick search on Ancestry.com. I'm going to show you how to conduct this search both on Ancestry and on Family Search. I went to search at the top, and you can see if you click on search at the top left, you can see that different options come up, and you click on vital records, which are birth, marriage, and death records. So I wanted to search for my great-grandfather's death certificate or information about his death. His name was Hyman. His last name was Kalmikoff, my last name. So I searched for a Hyman Kalmikoff who died in 1937. And I'm just going to say he died in New York. I'm going to conduct a quick search. Now, what the first result in this list of search results, there are six results in this search, but the first one for me at this moment is the most important one. You can see here, it says here, New York, US extracted death index. So I'm going to click on this, and let's see what it tells us. It shares with us my great-grandfather's name, the age that he died at, his approximate birth year based on his age, the dates that he died, the borough that he died in New York City, and the certificate number. Now, having the date of death is very important and the place of death. And this is just the index. This is not giving us the full transcript of what is on the original death record. And unfortunately, here on Ancestry.com, I cannot view the original death record. And something that I want to say is that I'm lucky that my ancestors settled in New York City, because the death records for New York City are available through 1948. Whenever I'm conducting research on a family, I say, oh, I hope their ancestor died 1948 or earlier, because then it will make my life easier conducting research if they were living in the New York area. Now, both Ancestry.com and familysearch.org have these things called card catalogs, where it gives you an inventory of all of their records. If you know you're conducting research for a specific country or a specific state within the United States or a specific province within Canada, you have to see what death records are available for the country, the state, the province that you're conducting research in. For example, in Los Angeles, for California, death records are available on familysearch.org through a certain year. So go to that card catalog on Ancestry.com, on familysearch.org, and so you can see, if you click on search and you go to the card catalog, you can see, okay, if I know I'm conducting research for a family in Denver, Colorado, for example, are death records available in Denver? I'm lucky because my family was living in New York. New York City death records are available to the public through 1948. Now, this is some basic information here from the death record. This is not the original death certificate. And this is just an index. It's giving us basic information, the date, the city, and the certificate number. What do we do with that information? Okay, I'm going to show you what to do with this info. I can also search for the same record on familysearch.org. I could click here at the top. Familysearch.org is a free resource. All you have to do is create a username and a password. You can click on search at the top left. And I wanted to see if I could find a record for Hyman Kalmikoff. I click on more options. I then click on death. And then I'm going to say that he died in New York in 1937. Now, I've done this a bunch of times, and I know nothing's going to come up. And that's frustrating. Why is nothing coming up? I know that his name was Hyman Kalmikoff. I know he died in 1937 in New York City. He came up in Ancestry.com. Why doesn't he come up in FamilySearch.org? It could be that FamilySearch.org doesn't have this record available in their database, but I know that's not the case. FamilySearch.org, see, Ancestry.com has the index of all the death records for New York City through 1948. FamilySearch.org has transcripts of those death records. So that will provide us with more information. So why am I not finding it? It's because his name was put into the system incorrectly. I'm going to put Cal, then an asterisk, and then FF. The asterisk makes it's like a wild card. And here he is. He's in the system as Hyman Kalmikoff or something like that, okay? But it's the same guy. How do we know it's the same guy? He died on June 9th, 1937. My great-grandfather died on June 9th, 1937. The event took place in Manhattan. Now I could click on this, and on the right side, not a full transcript, but a more comprehensive transcript of the original death record will come up. So it says Hyman Kalmikoff, or whatever that is. The date of the event was June 9th, 1937. He died in Manhattan. It gives us his address, that he was living at 4804 Foster Avenue in Brooklyn. I happen to know that that was the family's address at that time. He was a furrier, which I know my great-grandfather was a furrier. He was a leader of the Fur Workers Union in New York. He was buried on June 10th, 1937, and the death record will tell us what cemetery he was buried in. He was buried in Beth David Cemetery, which is a big Jewish cemetery in Elmont, New York, on the border of Queens and Long Island. Then it gives us his parents' names. The parents' names are very important because if we're conducting genealogical research, we want to try to go back as many generations as possible. And now I only knew my great-grandfather's name, but now the death record tells me that his parents' names were Julius and Miriam, that his parents were both born in Russia, and then it also says that his wife's name was Rose, and my great-grandmother's name was Rose. You can see here as well, it says the certificate number is 14119, and that's what this record on Ancestry.com says as well. That certificate number was 14119. Now, this is all really good. I have my great-grandfather in the index here on Ancestry.com. I have a transcript of his death record on FamilySearch.org. But what I really want to look at always is the original record. So how do I access the original record? Sometimes the original records are available online. Sometimes you might have to get in touch with the state archive or something like that. You'll have to find out. If you know the information for your great-grandmother and that she died in New Jersey, you have to find out, how can I access, for example, in New Jersey, a death record from 1940, right? And there are different procedures for accessing these records. Sometimes you have to pay, sometimes you have to submit a written request, and sometimes these records are just not available depending on the year and the place that the event took place. But again, just to start off, just to show you an example of how to use death and burial information, I'm going to show you, for example, in New York City, how this works. The municipal archives in the city of New York, they hold the microfilms for the death records in New York City through 1948. And using this information from the death record, I'm actually going to be able to now find my great-grandfather's original death record through the municipal archives. This is actually new within the last year and a half. The New York City Municipal Archives has created a new website where you can now access many of these death records for the city of New York. If you go to Google and you type in New York City Municipal Archives vital records or something like that, and you click on the first option, you can now access vital records for the city of New York through this website. And the information in this index is going to be vitally important in order for you to be able to find the original record. Now, I'm going to search for my great-grandfather's death certificate using this website through the municipal archives. I'm going to search by the certificate number. The certificate type gives me three different options: birth, death, or marriage. So I'm looking for a death certificate. And the certificate number I know because I found it both here in Ancestry.com and in FamilySearch.org, that it is 14119. So I'm going to paste that in, saying that that's the certificate number. Where did the event take place? My great-grandfather was living in Brooklyn, but he died in Manhattan, according to both the information on FamilySearch.org and Ancestry.com. And the year the event took place was 1937. So I'm searching by certificate number for a death certificate, the certificate number, the borough, and the year. Conduct a quick search. And look at this. Here is now my great-grandfather's original death certificate. And the original is always good to look at. I always prefer to look at the original. And the great thing about this is that they used to charge you. You used to have to put in a request to get these records. And they used to charge you like $11. I spent hundreds of dollars getting these records for my relatives from the municipal archives. Now they're all available online for free. And if you want to save this, I could click on the download button. And now I could save my great-grandfather's death certificate straight to my computer. Now let me zoom in. Let's see what information this death certificate contains. It tells us that he died in Manhattan, and it gives us the name of the institution that he died in. He died in Manhattan General Hospital with the address. And it says here that his name is Hyman Kalmikoff. Now, in order for this information to go into FamilySearch.org and Ancestry.com, a human being needs to sit here and read these records and put the information into the database. Unfortunately, when someone read my great-grandfather's death certificate in order to put the information into Family Search, they didn't spell that. They didn't read it as Kalmikoff. They spelled it at, they thought it was Kalurikeff. Okay, close, but that's why it was difficult for me to find my great-grandfather on Family Search. They tried their best to read the handwriting. 4804 was his place of residence, living in Brooklyn. And then it gives us some information about him, that he's male, white, and married. His wife's name is Rose Kalmikoff. That was my great-grandmother. He was about 50 years old at the time of death. He was a furrier. And it even says here that he was a furrier flesher, which is a specific type of furrier. He was a flesher. My grandfather was a flesher. Even my father was a flesher. I'm the first one not to become a furrier in my family in a long time. And then it says here the date that the deceased last worked. It says 1927. My great-grandfather had been sick for many years. And so for about 10 years, he didn't work. And then it says that he was in this occupation for about 30 years, that he was born in Russia. And then it even says here on the New York City death certificates, how long had he been living in the United States? And it says here about 28 years. Don't always take that as gospel truth. Sometimes the years that the person was living in the United States on these death records could be off by a few years. So approximately 28 years he had been living in the United States. It was actually more than that. He had immigrated to the United States in 1907. Okay. And then the really important part for me is the name of the parents of the deceased. So you can see here that it says that his father's name was Julius and his mother's name was Miriam. Many times they don't include a maiden name for the mother, which is annoying because it would be good to know the maiden name, okay? But something that you need to know that's very important about death records here in the United States, my great-grandfather was the immigrant in the family. He emigrated from what was then the Russian Empire, came to the United States. He was the first one in his family to come to this country. His parents never came here. They were Russian, Yiddish-speaking Jews. In all likelihood, his father's name was not Julius. What was very common was for them to anglicize the names of the parents on these records. So if the father's name was, let's say, Labe, they would put Lewis. If the mother's name was Chana, they would put Annie. If the mother's name was Chaya, they would put Ida. It's not a guarantee that that's exactly how they would translate it. For example, I was just doing research for a family where it said that the father's name on the death record, it said the father's name was Barney. I said, what's the likelihood of his name being Barney? This guy Barney never came to the United States. Well, I found a picture of the person's headstone. Barney ended up just being an anglicized version of Ben Sion. They put a name that sounded like the person's Jewish name. So when you find your ancestor's death record, especially if they were an immigrant, and it gives an English name for their parents, I'm going to show you another example of this. It's not my family. If it gives an English name and you know that person lived in a Yiddish-speaking Jewish community and never came to America, in all likelihood, they are anglicizing the name, giving it an English version. And we'll see, what was Julius really? Most men named Julius at that time were Yehuda in Hebrew. Okay, so we're going to have to see what is the end result with that. The other important piece of information here, it says place of burial. So if you want to know where your ancestors buried, try to find the death certificate, and the death certificate will have the name of the cemetery, and it says there Beth David Cemetery. And it gives us the date of burial. So he died on June 9th, 1937. He was buried the next day on June 10th. There's a second page to this, and it also tells you who is responsible for all of these arrangements being made. And it says here his wife, Rose Kalmikoff, with her address. Looking at who the informant is, or who the person responsible, the undertaker, the person responsible for these arrangements being made, always good to look at it because you might find the name of a relative or someone that you weren't aware of. So always look at that as well. The other piece of information that we didn't look at that's included on the death certificate is his cause of death. And for those of you who might be interested in knowing something about your family's medical history, my great aunt, my Oma, she was the genealogist in the family before I came along. And something that was very important to her was writing down what each person in the family died of. So I have pages in her handwriting of lists, different lists that she made over the years of what people died of. Doesn't look too good for me, but we'll talk about that another time. And my great-grandfather, died of TB, and that was the family story, that he had been sick. He had gone up to upstate New York to get some fresh air, and that was what they did at the time. And so he had diabetes, he had TB, and that's what he died of, was the TB. And that was very common at the time to see people dying of tuberculosis. And it even gives us like the last time that he was seen by his doctor and the time of his death. So there's a lot of information included in death records. So I really encourage you, if you are serious about conducting genealogical research on your ancestors, look for their death records. It will contain a lot of information about them. So now, the next thing I want to do, we'll do a few more of these to show you. I'll do one more of these to show you an example of another family that's not my own family. Okay, now I know that he's buried in Beth David Cemetery out on Long Island in Queens. So let's see now, can we find any information about his burial? And that's something that I want to speak about at length. There are many websites and resources now that provide information about burial. One website that I love, I'm on it every single day, is findagrave.com. I jokingly call it Facebook for dead people. I make that joke all the time. Find a Grave is a great genealogical resource. You can find burial information for your ancestors on this website if you're lucky. And if it's not there and you know what your ancestors' burial information is, you could add it, which is what I did sometimes for some of my ancestors who weren't already in the database. This is findagrave.com. It was started by a guy who liked to visit the graves of famous people, and now it has millions and millions of, 210 million memorials now on this website. So you can search to see if your ancestors or your relatives are in this database. So I wanted to see, can I find any information about any Kalmikoffs? So I'm just going to search for Kalmikoff. Now I'm lucky because my last name is uncommon. If your last name is Cohen, good luck. But Kalmikoff is pretty uncommon. So I'm going to conduct a quick search on Find a Grave. Find a Grave, by the way, is a totally free resource. You just have to sign up with an email and a password. And a lot of the memorials that are in the Find a Grave database, they come up in searches now on familysearch.org and ancestry.com. I just wanted to mention that as well. So I searched for Kalmikoff. The first one that comes up is A.B. Kalmikoff. That's my grandfather's cousin who was killed serving in the Second World War, and he's buried in the American Military Cemetery in Normandy, France. Okay. There are a bunch of Kalmikoffs on this list. And I scroll down here and you can see Chaim Kalmikoff, who died on June 9th, 1937. That is the date that my great-grandfather passed away. This is his memorial on the Find a Grave website. And there's even a picture of his headstone on the memorial. So you can click to view the original. And some headstones are more helpful than others. Some headstones contain more information than others. Luckily, in this case, you could see that there's not much Jewish imagery on this headstone. No Star of David, nothing like that. No Hebrew yahrzeit, an anniversary of the death. But it does say, for both my great-grandfather and my great-grandmother, Po Nikbar. You can see at the top in the Hebrew, there are those two Hebrew letters, Pei Nun, which stand for Po Nikbar, which means here lies or here is buried. Okay? And then it gives us the person's Jewish name and their father's name. And so here it says that my great-grandfather Hyman is Chaim, the son of Yudah. For my great-grandmother, it says that her Jewish name was Nechama Rachel, the daughter of Shaul Tanchum. Now, let's say you find your ancestor's headstone, and you went to Hebrew school, you could get by with the vowels on the high holidays, but you can't really read Hebrew without the vowels, which is the case for many American Jews or Jews who live outside of Israel. We could read Hebrew all right, but we can't really get by without the vowels. It might be hard for some of us to translate this. And so what I encourage you to do, if you're on social media, if you're on Facebook, there are really great Jewish genealogy Facebook groups. One is Jewish Genealogy Portal, and another one is Tracing the Tribe. And people are constantly posting in these Facebook groups pictures of their ancestors' headstones and asking others to translate them for them. And within minutes, I'm telling you, within minutes, people are translating these headstones. So if you don't read Hebrew, don't be disheartened. There are many people on the internet who are willing to take a few minutes to translate the Hebrew for you. But it's very important that you find your ancestor's death certificate, but you also find the headstone. Now, my great-grandfather's death certificate said that his father's name was Julius. I had a feeling that Julius was an anglicized version of Yehuda or Yudah or Yudel, something like that, Judah. Many men at the time who had that Jewish name were known as Julius in English. But it wasn't a guarantee. Julius could have been an anglicized version of something else, but I needed to confirm. And so this, looking at the headstone, really confirmed for me. It says here that my great-grandfather's father's name was Yudah, which is a Yiddish pronunciation of Yehuda, which is Judah. We can also go back for a second and look at those search results. On this list as well is a picture of my great-grandfather's brother, his headstone, so we can compare. Let's see what this says. This says that his Jewish name is Lazer, the son of Yehuda. Lazer, the son of Yehuda, Chaim, the son of Yudah. These two men are brothers, and their father's name is Yehuda. This was very, very useful information when conducting research on my family tree. Another website that I want to mention that you can also find burial information on is billiongraves.com. Again, just like familysearch.org, you can sign up to use billiongraves.com. I'm not familysearch.org, findagrave.com, findagrave.com, billiongraves.com. Both websites are free. all you need to do is sign up with an email and create a password. You can search for graves here. We're going to come back to this website in a second. And there's also jewishgen.org. JewishGen is the global home for Jewish genealogy. It is an amazing resource. I could spend hours just going through JewishGen, showing you how to use all the different resources on their website. But one resource is the JewishGen online worldwide burial registry, known as JAUBER. And if we go to JewishGen, to their homepage, jewishgen.org, and we hover over research, you'll see the fourth option down is burial registry. Click on burial registry. So here's the JewishGen online worldwide burial registry on family search. On JewishGen. And I typed in Kalmikoff to see what would come up. Conducted a quick search. And if we go down to New York, under USA, there are 6 listed here. And look at that, here's Hyman Kalmikoff. And there's a picture. How do I know that there's going to be a picture of the headstone? Because you could see under his name is that image of a headstone. But I could click on View Full Burial Record and look at this. Here's another picture of my great-grandfather's headstone in that same cemetery. And so you might find your ancestors in JAUBER on the jewishgen.org website. You might find them on Find a Grave. You might find them in Billion Graves. You might not find them anywhere. And that does happen sometimes where I'm conducting research for a family. I'm trying to find their family members' burial information, and they're not in any of these databases. I'm showing you things that work. That way you can get a sense of how all of this connects. But that's not always the case. Sometimes the information is not in these databases, but you could actually add it yourself if you wanted to. For example, if you go to findagrave.com, you could add your family's burial information. So if you go to JAUBER, the JewishGen Online Worldwide Burial Registry, you could see here a bunch of Kalmikoffs listed here as well. These are my grandfather's parents and his aunts and uncle and his cousins. But the really cool thing, really cool thing is that, remember this Julius and Miriam, who are my great-grandfather's parents? And I told you Julius is really Yehuda or Yudah. Well, pictures of Julius and Miriam's graves are also online. And these are my great-great-grandparents. Their graves are still in existence in Belarus, in Shklov, in the town that they are from. Do you see here it says Eastern Europe on the JewishGen Online Worldwide Burial Registry? And it says here Mogilov. Mogilov is a province in Belarus today, modern-day Belarus. And there are 4 people with the last name Kalmikoff buried in Mogilov. You could actually see here, there's a Yudah Kalmikoff who was buried in Shklov in Belarus. That's my great-great-grandfather, and his wife, Mariasha, my great-great-grandmother. Mariasha is Miriam. So Mariasha was anglicized to Miriam. Mariasha is a Russian Yiddish version of Miriam. But if I click on View Full Burial Record, look at this. Here's a picture of my great-great-grandfather's grave in Belarus, in Shklov. I didn't have to get on a plane. I didn't have to travel anywhere. I actually did go to Shklov and I did visit the grave. But to find this information, it was all available online. Unfortunately, the original headstone had been smashed, and this not so attractive thing was put up later on. You can see that this headstone is written in Cyrillic, but the interesting thing about this specific headstone is that it's actually Yiddish words being written in Russian letters, in Cyrillic letters. And at the very top, it says Kalmikoff and Yudah. That's my great-great-grandfather, Yudah Kalmikoff. This is his grave in Shklov, Belarus. And if we go back to the search results, I could view my great-great-grandmother. Here's an image of her grave. And it says in Belarusian, Mariasha Kalmakova, and that she died in 1928. This is really amazing. Unfortunately, you can see here, this headstone only has Russian writing, and it doesn't give us her father's name, which was disappointing to me. I was really hoping that it would provide us with her father's name, because that would get me another generation further back. It would get me to my great-great-great-grandfather on that line. Unfortunately, I was not lucky. This is and this is very common. You'll see in cemeteries in what was part of the former Soviet Union. It was very common for headstones post-revolution to only have Russian on them and no Hebrew. And so this is very common. And I just want to say, I'm lucky that my ancestors' graves are still intact in this town. Many of the graves in this cemetery have been destroyed during or after the war. And that is the case in much of Eastern Europe. A lot of the graves during the war, during the Second World War, and after the Second World War were destroyed. The headstones were used as building material. And so sometimes it's more common to find Jewish headstones in the basements of homes as foundation than it is in the actual cemetery. So keep that in mind. But if you are lucky, you might find your ancestors. Headstone. So this is my great-great-grandmother's headstone in Belarus. Okay. The other thing I just wanted to point out, if we go back to my great-grandfather's profile on findagrave.com, there's also a picture here of the burial society that he and my grandmother are buried with. And I want to speak about burial societies. Burial societies are especially important if your family lived in America, especially in the New York area. Jews in New York and the surrounding area created societies. And these societies, sometimes they were based on the town that the people were from. And this is the case here. These are all Jews from Shklov, Belarus, what was then Shklov, Russia, the Russian Empire. Sometimes it was a synagogue. Sometimes it could be a synagogue society, burial society. It could be a professional group. For example, my great-grandparents on my other side of the family are buried with Jewish postal workers in Wellwood Cemetery in Long Island. And so a lot of Jews are buried with these societies. They're called Landsmannschaften. Okay, mutual aid societies. A landsman is someone who comes from the same place as you do. And so a lot of these Landsmannschaften are mutual aid societies for Jews who come from the same town, but they could also be affiliated with the same synagogue, the same profession. Sometimes families created their own society. I've done research for multiple families that had their own society, and everybody who's buried in this society plot is related to one another. Those are really cool examples that I don't see too often, but it's really amazing when I see these families that came to America, and in order to keep everybody together, they created these societies that would meet regularly. And then I even did research for one family that they would have the annual cemetery day where everybody would go together to visit the cemetery to visit all of their relatives. And so it's always important to find out when you're conducting research for your ancestors if they're buried with a society. And this was the case for my great-grandparents. They are buried with the Second Shklover Welfare Society in Beth David Cemetery. Now I'm going to show you an example from a family that I'm doing research for right now. The family's last name, let's go to their family tree. The family's last name is Markowitz. I'm going to show you here. You can see we have Samuel Markowitz is this person's grandfather. His Jewish name was Sender. And we know that he died on October 17th, 1942 in Brooklyn, New York. And I was able to find his death certificate as well. Let's just go here for a second. I'm going to go to my Google Drive and pull up the death certificate. Where are they here? Markowitz. Here we go. Markowitz genealogy. Okay, now let's just go into their Google Drive folder where I save all these different records. And here is Samuel Markowitz's death record. Well, just like my great-grandfather's, it has his address, it has his wife's name, it says that he's widowed. He's already a widower at the time. His wife had died before him. It gives us his date of birth, gives us his age, it says that he's a carpenter, a whole bunch of information. It gives us his parents' names, Wolf Markowitz and Hannah Markowitz. And it says that his mother's maiden name was Hannah Horowitz. Very good. But the other important piece of information that it says here is that he was buried in Mount Zion Cemetery. Now, if you have ancestors who come from the New York area, it's important to know that many of the Jewish cemeteries in the New York area have websites that you can go to search to see where your ancestors or relatives are buried. Find out if the cemetery that your ancestors are buried in, if they have a website, and if that website provides you with burial information. If not, call the cemetery and find out what information they have about your relatives. I have every single cemetery in the New York area. I have their number saved in my phone. I'm calling them on a regular basis to get information about people who are buried in these different cemeteries. The Mount cemeteries, and there are a lot of Mount cemeteries in the New York area: Mount Zion, Mount Hebron, Mount Lebanon, Mount Judah, Mount Ararat. There are tons of all of them have websites. And Mount Zion Cemetery is not an exception. You can see here, this is the website for Mount Zion Cemetery in Maspeth, Queens, New York. And you can click on interment search, and you can search for the names of people who are buried in the cemetery. So I want to see if I could search for Samuel Markowitz, who died in 1942. And look at this. Here's Sam Markowitz. It gives us the name of the society that he's buried. Now, there are two Samuel Markowitzes who are buried in this cemetery who died in 1942. How are we going to know which one is ours? Well, let's look at the date on the death certificate. What day did this guy die? He died, it says here, on January, no, he was born on January 3rd, 18. It says here that he died on October 17th, 1942. Okay, and this guy was buried on October 18th. So this is the right Samuel or Sam Markowitz. And the important piece of information here is that it gives us the name of the society that he's buried with. It says here Pohost. So you could do two things. You could call the cemetery and see what information they have about the society. Or you can go to the Jewish Genealogical Society of New York website. The Jewish Genealogical Society of New York, they have a burial society database where you could type in a part of the name of the society, and it will give you information about that society. So, for example, if we go to the Jewish Genealogical Society of New York's website and we go to databases and then go down to the JGS Burial Society, so that's the Jewish Genealogical Society Burial Society project, we can search the Burial Society database. This database is not perfect. Sometimes they get some of the information wrong, and I'm going to show you an example of this here. But I wanted to see if I could find information about this Pohost Society that's in Mount Zion Cemetery in Queens. Conducted a quick search, and look at this. It says Mount Zion Cemetery. It gives me the full name of the society. It's Chevra Agudath Achim Anshe Pohost. And it gives us the city or the town that it's associated with and the country that that town or city sits in today. I'll show you another example of how to use this. My ancestors are buried with the Second Shklover Welfare Society. I typed in Shklover the way it's spelled on that society. Here it's spelled Second Shklover, right? S-C-H-K-L-O-V-E-R. Go to the Jewish Genealogical Society of New York website. Type in Shklover. Let's see what it says. Here we go. This gives us a list of every single Shklover society. There are a lot of Jews from Shklov, I guess, and they each had, and there are multiple societies for Jews from this town. And you can see where the Jews from Shklov had burial plots. So you can see here Beth David Cemetery, Mount Zion Cemetery, and Washington Cemetery. And it gives us the full name of the society, the city that it's associated with, and the city or the town, and the country that it is located in today. Sometimes these societies had both an English name and a Yiddish name or a Hebrew name. And sometimes in the comments, it will give you the Yiddish or Hebrew name of that society. And you can see here the Second Shklover Welfare Society was known as the Zweiter Shklover Chevra, whatever, okay? And that was the Yiddish name for the society. So let's say you know that your ancestors lived in a certain place, they came from a certain town, but you don't know where they're buried and you're having a hard time finding them. One way might be finding out, did the town or the city that they're from, were there any burial societies for that town or city? And where are those burial societies, where did they have their plots? In what cemetery? And then you can call and find out. Or you could search on Find a Grave, or you could search on these websites for the cemetery. I hope I'm being clear. I hope that this information is helpful to you. There are a lot of resources here. I'm just trying to show you how to pull it all together in order to conduct research on your family. Okay. So we looked at Find a Grave. So I'm going to show you an example. All of those mount cemeteries in the New York area, their entire lists of burials have been added to the Find a Grave database. And so I could go to Find a Grave and type in Sam Markowitz, and I could say that he died in 1942 and he's buried in New York. Conduct a quick search on Find a Grave. And here he is, Sam Markowitz, who's buried in Mount Zion Cemetery. And it even says here, plot info, co-host. I didn't put this information into Find a Grave. This was already here. But you can see in this example, there's no picture. You can click on Request Photo, and you can request for a photo to be taken. The only way that photos will be taken is if there's a volunteer or a team of volunteers who go to these cemeteries on a regular basis to take photos. I happen to know that Mount Zion is in a very industrial part of Queens, New York, and there is a long, long list. If we go to Mount Zion Cemetery on Find a Grave, there's a long, long list of outstanding photo requests. But you see here, it says that there are 8,000 open photo requests. So there's no volunteer who's going to the cemetery on a regular basis to take pictures. So what do you do then if there's no one going to the cemetery? You can call the cemetery and find out if they are able and willing to send you a picture of the grave. Because so many people are calling these cemeteries on such a regular basis, many of them have started charging for this service. So for example, for this Markowitz family, I just conducted research for them. I know that I'm not going to get a picture from Find a Grave because of the long list of outstanding photo requests. But all I needed to do was send a $20 check and a note. I sent a handwritten note to the cemetery saying, hi, I need a picture taken of this grave. I included my $20 check. I provided them with the location and the date of burial, which I got from the website. And about a week and a half later, I should be getting the picture of the headstone. I haven't gotten it yet, but they're pretty good about it. There's another cemetery in the New York area called Mount Hebron Cemetery, where you can just pay directly online. You can search for a person who's buried in the society. Let's say there's a family that I was doing research for. Their last name was Fallowitz, right? So here's Jenny Fallowitz and her husband Zelig Fallowitz. You can actually see here when you click on his name on the cemetery website, it says pay for photo. You go there, you put in your credit card information, you provide your email address, and within a few days, I had an email from the cemetery with a picture of Zelig Fallowitz's grave. And it was actually a really nice picture. This family was very pleased with the results of the research. You can actually see here, we go to this family that I just did research for. Fallows. Let's keep going. I just want to show you a picture, for example, of this grave that was sent to me by Mount Hebron Cemetery. Now you can see here, Zelig, he died in 1950, which means I don't have access to his death record, because in New York, the death records for New York City are only available up until 1948. So I didn't have any other record to go on. He got married in the old country. He died here in New York. And so I didn't have any other record to get his father's name. But I was able to get his father's name using the headstone. It says here that Selig, his father's name was Zelig. He's Zelig. His father was Labe. Then it says here that his wife's name was Charna, the daughter of Yosef Zev. So using these websites, I was able to get pictures of the graves, and I was able to go back another generation on this family tree. By the way, I'm speaking a lot about New York, but a lot of what I'm saying is true for other places. Find a grave doesn't only work for New York. There are memorials on Find a Grave all around the world. So if you're in the UK, if you're in Australia, if you're in South Africa, if you're in Germany, France, there might be information about your ancestors on this website. I want to show you another example of super useful information from a headstone in my own family research, okay? I found out that my great-great-grandfather on another branch of the family tree was a guy named Harry Sive. And I typed his name in on Find a Grave. And I also typed in his name on Jewish Gen. Remember this Jewish Gen burial registry? So go to Research Burial Registry. I typed in Sive. I submitted a given name as well, phonetically like, let's say Harry. He also had TB, my great-great-grandfather, and went out to Colorado to get some fresh air as well, as they would do. And he died, unfortunately, in Colorado, and he's buried in Denver, Colorado. And here's a pic. Here's my great-great-grandfather's headstone in Denver, Colorado. I have never been to Denver. My family did not live in Denver. He just happened to die there because he was sick. And you can see here also on the Jewish Gen Online Worldwide Burial Registry, under Colorado, there's a guy named Harry Sive. And if we look at the full burial record, here's another picture of that same stone. Now, this picture quality is not as good. It's very hard to read the writing on the stone in this picture. But the picture on Find a Grave was much better. And the English and the Hebrew was much clearer. And in this case, I really struck gold. He was a random member of my family who's not buried with any of our other relatives. He's not buried with any society. And I was really struck. How am I going to find out what town he was born in? Luckily, on his headstone, they included that information. It says here that his name is Harry Sive, and he was born in Gorsk, Russia in 1859. And it gives me the date of death, December 7th, 1892. But then the Hebrew gives me more important information. Again, those two letters, Pei Nun, here lies. And then it says that his Jewish name is Tzvi, the son of Natan or Nassan Eliezer. And then it even spells his name in his last name in Yiddish. Sive was originally Ziv, Zayin Yud Vav Vav, Ziv. It was a very common last name in Lithuania. And so his full name is Tzvi, the son of Nassan Eliezer Ziv. So if Harry Sive is my great-great-grandfather, now I have the name of my great-great-great-grandfather because his name is on the headstone. Then it says that he died B'Shem Tov with a good name, and then it gives us the Hebrew dates that he died. And then it even says in Hebrew that he was born in the year, and then it gives us the corresponding Hebrew year to 1859. And then it says that he was born in Kehila Kedosha, right, in the holy community of Gorsk. It says at the very end, in the bottom left, Gimel Aleph Reish Zayin Dalet, Gorsk. That was super, super, super useful information. This I was really lucky because it provided me with the name of the town that he was born in on his headstone. So the question is, where's Gorsk? I had never heard of that town before. I had no connection to this town at all. And Jewish Gen has this really great thing called the Town Finder, which I've spoken about in my other Jewish genealogy presentations. But you could type in the name of a town. So I typed it in the way that it's spelled on the headstone, Gorsde. Search for Gorsk, and here it is. Gorst is Gargzdai, Lithuania. And you can see there are different names for this town in different languages. It was known in Yiddish as Gorst. Germans called it Garsden. It's called in Lithuania, it's Gargzdai. And you could see where this town was located at different points in history. It was part of the Russian Empire, then Lithuania, then the Soviet Union, and now it sits in modern-day Lithuania. So my ancestor, Harry Saiv, whose Hebrew name was Tzvi, whose father's name was Natan or Nassan Eliezer, depending on your pronunciation, he was from the town of Gargzdai. So that was really, really a win for me. Let me show you another example. So let's move away from the New York area. We just spoke about Denver. Let's go a little further west. I'm going to show you another family that I'm conducting research for right now. I'm going to show you this example. So this person here, her great-great-grandfather was Abraham Fishman. He was born around 1872 in Russia, and he died in 1945 in Los Angeles. Well, we're really lucky because the death record in Los Angeles should be available to us. So I went, now the death record is not available on Ancestry.com, but I went to Family Search, and I wanted to see if I could find the death record for Abraham Fishman, who died in 1945 in Los Angeles. So I searched for an Abraham Fishman, and I said that he died, his death took place in Los Angeles, and that he died in 1945. No results found. What are we going to do? Let's change this now to California. Okay, here we go. Here he is. So instead of putting the city, I needed to put the state. Here's his death record, dying on March 26, 1945. If we click on this, on the right side, a transcript of the death record will appear. But more importantly, we can click and open the original record. So this is not a family member of mine. This is a family that I'm doing research for right now. Oh, they're not liking this. Okay, let's do it this way, open it this way. And this provides us with a lot of information, these death records, like we saw before with my own family. And it says here that his name is Abe Fishman. It gives us the place that he was living, where he was, his address, asked for the birthday, but it says that they don't know what his birthday was. He was about 73 years old when he died. It says that he is a retail merchant in groceries, and actually he did own his own grocery. And then it says here, the name of the father, Peter Fishman. Now, Abraham Fishman was an Eastern European Jewish immigrant. His father never came to the United States. And I don't know many Jews at that time who were named Peter. And so the question is, what the heck is Peter? What is that an anglicized version of? We're going to have to see. A lot of times, they don't even bother putting a name for a mother, and that's very disappointing. A lot of times when you're conducting genealogical research, your paternal lines will go longer than your maternal lines because they don't bother putting the mother's names on these records. Now, I wanted to see if I could find Abe or Abraham Fishman's death record. We found his death record, if we could find anything about his grave. So I went to find a grave. And we can conduct a quick search here for I'm just going to say Abe, like A.B. Fishman. I'm going to say 1945, and the cemetery location is in California. And look at this. Here's an Abraham Fishman who died on March 26, 1945. I did not put this information on the internet. It was already here when I started conducting the research. You could even see the name of the user who, the Find a Grave user member who added the picture. Now I'm going to look at the original record and look at the Hebrew. Okay. There's a lot written here in Hebrew. We're not going to translate the entire thing just for the sake of time. But it's very nice, actually. It says that they loved each other and that in life and in death, they never parted. They were never separate. Okay. And it says here in Hebrew that his Jewish name is Avraham Abba, which makes sense. His name was Abraham, so Avraham was his Jewish name. It said on his death record that his father's name was Peter. Okay. What's his father's Hebrew name here? It says Peretz. Peretz is a good Hebrew name. His father's name was Peretz. His father's name was not Peter. And so that's what the family tree says. If we go back to their family tree, it will say that his father's name was Peretz Fishman, and his wife, Dora, his wife's name was Devorah Zlata, the daughter of Chaim Yisrael. And it also provides us with their Hebrew yahrzeits, the Hebrew anniversaries of their deaths. If that's something that's important to you, to be able to observe and commemorate your ancestors' yahrzeits, you might be able to get information from the headstones about when they passed away on the Hebrew calendar. Sometimes you'll have a situation where there's only Hebrew on a headstone, and you're not sure what the English date was. And something that I use a lot is the Hebrew calendar converter, where you can type in a Hebrew date, and then it will convert it to the Gregorian date. So this is also if you have a headstone that's written only in Hebrew, and you're not sure what date the person died, you can get that information here by converting it. It might be off by a day because our Hebrew days start at night. So it might be off by a day depending on the time of day that they died, but it'll give you a rough estimate of when the person may have passed away if you convert the Hebrew date to the Gregorian date. Okay. Something else that I want to mention, I mentioned the website Billion Graves. Billion Graves is really great if you're conducting research here in the United States. But what a lot of people don't know is that Billion Graves, they've photographed virtually every single headstone in Israel. So if you have relatives or ancestors who lived in Israel, I really suggest you check out Billion Graves. The issue with searching for Israeli graves on this website is that you need to conduct the search in Hebrew. So if you go to billiongraves.com, you click on research and you do a person search, you need to type in the name in Hebrew. Let's say you don't speak Hebrew or you don't know how to type Hebrew. Something that I use just for the sake of time, because I speak and I can type in Hebrew, but just for the sake of time, I will go to Google Translate, and type in a person's name. I'm going to show you an example from another family that I conducted research for. Okay, we got to go to the Feldman family tree. And let's see here. They're on the first page. Just want to show you an example. So these people that I conducted research for, let's see here. Okay, their ancestor, Isaac Friedman, so it's their great-grandfather. Their great-grandfather left and went to Israel. His name was Isaac Feldman. He emigrated from what's now Moldova. He came to the United States. He lived in the United States for a few years, but his dream was to move to Israel, and that's what he ended up doing. He left and he moved to Israel. And the family wanted to know whatever happened to him. There was some tension in the family, and connections were lost, and so they weren't sure what happened to their great-grandfather. And on Ancestry.com, I actually found in this database of U.S. Reports of deaths of American citizens abroad, I found Isaac Feldman's death when he died in Israel. He died in Israel in 1961, but he was an American citizen. So his death was reported, and it gives us a lot of information. It tells us where he died, that he died at 12 Hayarkon Street in Tel Aviv. This is a great record because it's in English, so you don't have to deal with translating Hebrew. But the really important piece of information is that it says here, the disposition of the remains, that he's buried in the Kiryat Shaul cemetery in Tel Aviv. So now for this family, I had their great-grandfather's name, the date that he died in Israel, and the cemetery that he's buried in. Okay? Using this information, I wanted to see if I could find Isaac Feldman's grave in Israel. So I went to Google Translate. I just typed in Yitzchak, which is the Hebrew version of Isaac, Yitzchak Feldman. No, that's translating it into Yiddish. Let's go to Hebrew. Okay, Yitzchak Feldman. I copied this and I went to Billion Graves. And I typed in Yitzchak, typed in Feldman. I said that he died in 1961. And I'm just going to take this away and just say 0 years. Okay. Now here's a Yitzchak Feldman, but he was buried in the Old North Ashkelon Cemetery. Okay, and you can see he's the only one that I could find in this database, and that was very disappointing. So what do I do? Well, in all likelihood, because this is a grave that is in Israel, they don't have the Gregorian date on the headstone. They probably have the Hebrew date. So that will cause an issue for me to find the grave. And if I take out the death year, how many Yitzchak Feldmans are there that were buried in Israel, right? So that might take too long to go through all of those, right? So I could also type in Kiryat Shaul Cemetery, billion graves, and go directly to the cemetery page on billion graves. I'm sorry, this website's acting up a little, it's a little slow tonight. And I could search here for the last name Feldman, and we could type in Yitzchak as well to see if there's any Yitzchak Feldman who's buried in this cemetery. Okay. So here's a Yitzchak Feldman. Just for the sake of time, I'm not going to go through every single one. I'm going to click to view the full image. Here's a Yitzchak Feldman who's buried in the Kiryat Shaul Cemetery in Tel Aviv. It says, our beloved father, Ish Tam V'Yashar, like a simple and straight, like upstanding guy, Yitzchak Feldman, the son of Menashe. Now, how do I know that this guy, Yitzchak Feldman, the son of Menashe, is my Yitzchak Feldman? Well, it has here the date that he died in Hebrew. And it said that he died on the 7th day of Tevet, Tafshin Chaf Bet, 5722. So let's go back to that Hebrew calendar converter that I mentioned before. This will be a great example of how to use these resources. Because I don't have an English date here on the headstone, I only have the Hebrew date. So I'm going to say it's the 7th of Tevet, 5700, what did I say, 22. Convert to Gregorian. It says here that's the 14th day of December, 1961. What day does it say here that Isaac Feldman died? December 14th, 1961. That's pretty good. I'm seeing some nods here. People like that. That's a good one, right? Like this is how you conduct this research. So I'm just trying to show you how many resources there are online to research your family tree just using death and burial information. One more thing I want to mention. Mount of Olives. It is the oldest continuously used Jewish cemetery in the world. It's right next to the Temple Mount on the Western Wall in Jerusalem. And the Mount of Olives, they also have a really great website where you can search for names of people who were buried here. Okay, and again, the website's in Hebrew. They have Hebrew and English versions. Okay, so yeah, I'm going to go back to the English version. They have both Hebrew and English versions, and you can conduct research here to see if you could find information about relatives who were buried on the Mount of Olives. Something I want to mention that's very important is that in Israel, especially for Holocaust survivors, it was very common for Holocaust survivors to have the names of their relatives who were killed in the Holocaust put on their headstones. So if you have Holocaust-related history in your family, and you know that your grandparents or your great-grandparents are Holocaust survivors and they're buried in Israel, it was very common for Holocaust survivors to have their relatives' names put on their stones, even if they're not buried there. Have their relatives' names put there because there's no other memorial for them. That's very common. I see that a lot here on the Mount of Olives or in other cemeteries throughout Israel, survivors having their relatives' names put here. I'm just going to show you one. I'm doing research on a family named Korkidi. Nissim Korkidi was one of the founders of Tel Aviv, and his great-granddaughter reached out to me to conduct some research. And I wanted to see if I could find any Korkidis who were buried on the Mount of Olives. So again, I searched in Hebrew. And here is actually a grave for a Leah Barnes Korkidi. Here's even a picture of the woman. which is really crazy. And there should be here as well a picture of her grave. Let's see. Ah, here it is. And we could click on the picture of the grave. And so this woman who just hired me, this is actually a picture of her grandmother's headstone on the Mount of Olives. The picture is not the best quality, but it says here that her name is Leah Barnes Korkidi Levate Millman, that her maiden name was Millman. And there's a lot of information here on this headstone. Okay. I think I covered most of what I wanted to cover. I didn't get into the whole thing about Kohanim and Leviim and all that stuff. I'm not going to get into that now because I want to leave it open now for Q&A. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. The other thing that I do want to do, though, is put up my contact information for those of you who might want to reach out with any questions. You're more than welcome to reach out after the presentation. Let me just go to my Jewish genealogy presentation, and I'll put up my contact information on the screen. That way you can see it. Okay, there's my contact info. Oop. Louis Sokol, he says here, both my grandfathers died in 1949 in New York City. Well, that stinks. That is very annoying because the New York City death records are available to the public only through 1948. If you wanted to, if you wanted to get his death record from 1949, the death records from 1949 onward are not held by the municipal archives. They're held by the Department of Health. And you can order the death record through the Department of Health, but you might find him listed in the index on Ancestry.com, for example, your grandfather, and you can use that information from the index to provide the Department of Health with more information to make sure they send you the right certificate. But they do charge for that, so just keep that in mind. There is a fee to order your the death certificate for your grandfather from the Department of Health in New York. Okay, but yeah, it drives me nuts when I see that someone died in 1948. Are there any search engines for Germany that have English translation? Well, I use Google Chrome for everything, and my Google Chrome browser, if I'm on a website that's in a language that I don't know, my browser automatically translates the page for me. So that's what I encourage you to do. Use Google Chrome as your browser. A lot of times I'll be on a website that's in German or French or Russian, and my browser will automatically translate the page. That's my strongest suggestion. Just want to show you one more example, though, from that Jewish Gen burial registry, because you just asked about Germany. My grandmother's family, they were German Jews, and their last name was Grumbach, and they were from the town of Breisach. I'm hoping to visit Breisach this coming summer. And I wanted to see if they had any burial information for my ancestors in Breisach. And you could click here, it says Germany. There are 9 people buried in Breisach with the last name Grumbach. This woman here, Julie Picard Grumbach, ended up being my great-great-great-grandmother, 3 greats. And this man here, Seligman Grumbach, is her husband, my great-great-great-grandfather. So you can see here, there are no little pictures of graves, which means there's no image on this website. So if I click on view full burial record, it just gives us his name, the date that he died, and it gives us the name of the cemetery. And it's the newer Jüdischer Friedhof, which is the new Jewish cemetery. So now I don't have a picture of the grave, but I was able to get in touch with people in Breisach who were able to send me a picture of his grave. I added the information myself to find a grave, and I added the picture. So now if you go to findagrave.com, you type in Seligman Grumbach, here he is, my great-great-great-grandfather. Here's his grave in this town of Breisach. And the Hebrew, again, has important information. It gives us his father's name, which was Natan, or Nassan, so Nathan. So that gives me now my 4 times great-grandfather. Again, this is through years of research that I came to realize that I'm connected to these people, and I discovered my connection to them. But a lot of information is available here. It's just a matter of figuring out how to access it. This recording will be available, will be sent to everybody in the coming days. Okay, I'm not going to answer anything about birth certificates tonight. Any other questions? Feel free to unmute yourselves as well if you have any questions. Thank you for being here. I hope this was helpful. We went a little over, but there's a lot of important information to share. Any other questions, comments?
I have a question.
Yeah, please.
My husband grew up very, very, very Reformed.
Yeah.
And when we went to his grandfather's grave, we saw that the headstone had the Kohen hands on it. And his father said, "Oh, I might have heard something about that." How can we tell whether they were really Kohanim or not? Because the headstone really says nothing.
Yeah, so I'm going to just bring you to a family tree. Well, if the Kohen hands are on a headstone, I would assume then that they really were Kohanim, because only Kohanim put those hands on the headstones. I'm going to bring you to a family that I did research for. Let me see if I could find it quickly, just so that people know what we're talking about here. Here they are, Arf. This is a friend of mine. His family, they're all Kohanim. They're all Kohanim. Let's see here. Here it is. Where's the picture of the grave? I know that I took pictures of the graves. Where are they? Where are they? Okay, it might not have been as easy as that. Let's see. Where are they? Here's one. Well, that's the wife. Where's the husband's grave? Here it is. So here's a picture. This is actually a really great example because this is a picture of a grave that has these hands, and that is the symbol of the Kohanim, the priests. And in the Torah, Aaron was the brother of Moses, and Aaron and his descendants, his male descendants, were chosen to be the priests who would do the service in the temple, and they had the special task of blessing the Jewish people. And on the holidays, like Sukkot and Pesach and Shavuot, those holidays, they get up onto the bima in the synagogue and they bless the congregation. And this is the symbol that they do with their hands. Leonard Nimoy took this symbol and did the live long and prosper with this, right? Because he knew it from going to synagogue as a child. And this indicates that your ancestors are Kohanim. So I assume if someone has this on their headstone that they really are a Kohen. I was doing research for a friend of mine. Her father hired me to do research, and his grandfather, they had those hands on his headstone, And they said to me, "We're pretty sure our great grandfather was just an egomaniac who liked the idea of being a Kohen and put the hands on his headstone, even though it wasn't true." And that ended up being the case. Not one other male member of that family had any indication on their headstone that they were a Kohen. So I would say to you, expand your search. Let's say your husband's grandfather had a brother or cousins who lived in this country. Find their headstones. Do they have any indication that they are Kohanim? And traditionally, the Kohen or Levi lineage is passed down father to son. So it would have to be a male relative who was not married on the male line. And that would help you determine whether or not they're really Kohanim.
Okay, thank you.
So that was the long answer to your short question. The other thing that I want to mention here on this headstone that I really like is that there's a poem here on the headstone, which is, you see it commonly now in the Orthodox community, where people have a better grasp of the Hebrew language in America. Or you'll see it on older headstones where there are acrostic poems where it's a poem that describes the person, but the first letter of each line spells the person's name. This person's Jewish name was Anshel, and you can see the first letter of each line spells Anshel. You'll see that's also very common to see on headstones. Any other questions? Let me just see what's happening in the chat here.
So I have a question.
Yeah, please.
First a comment. So I've had the, I'll say, good fortune of having attended a couple of your lectures in the past, and that got me jump started into researching my family tree.
Oh,
and
cool.
I've been using Ancestry and Jewish Gen a little bit, and I've gotten pictures of a lot of the graves, and I'm signed up with findagrave.com. So I'm glad to know about billiongraves.com.
Yeah.
That's new to me. And so I've gotten to basically all the folks that are buried in this country. My grandparents from both sides, they came from what was then Russia, the early part of the century, 1902, 1904, 1906. And so now I'm challenged with going back, going overseas, to finding out more about my paternal grandparents' family, who come from Belarus, and then my maternal grandparents' family, who come from the Kiev area.
Okay.
And so I guess my question is, are you going to be doing another lecture focusing on
How to bridge the gap?
Yes.
That is it's very hard. And I struggled with that for a long time in my own research. Like I exhausted all of the resources here in the United States and did a pretty solid job. I think a lot of people struggle closing the gap between America and the old country. And it's really hit or miss, depending on where your family is from. And so we could speak more about that offline if you'd like to. But I would say, like I gave presentations here for the Union for Traditional Judaism. My part 1 is dedicated to North American Jewish genealogy. And then the second part is dedicated to bridging the gap and trying to find records and resources in the old country. And so I'm not sure if you've attended that lecture, but that might be helpful. And I could send you the link to that. That's available online through the Union for Traditional Judaism. But yeah, it's hard, and a lot of people struggle with it.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll send you a note requesting the link to that lecture.
I appreciate Lewis's comment. He says Jewish Gen has special focus groups by location. That is true. If you go to the Jewish Gen, the Jewish Gen website, I'll just show for everybody. You go to Jewish Gen and you go to research. You could actually go to regional and topical databases. And you can narrow it down by country and other things. So, okay.
Right. There's a wealth of information there.
Thank you. Yeah, a lot of information. Yeah. All right, everybody. I'm going to close it out tonight. It's always good to leave people wanting more. Thank you for being here this evening. I hope it was helpful and informative.
It was very helpful. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Oh, my friend, you're from Agudat Achim up in Schenectady, yeah?
That's it. No, I was
It's funny that you're here though, because I'm doing research for a family right now. The family, they were all members of Agudat Achim, and they're buried in the Agudat Achim cemetery.
Okay.
So I was actually going to call Rabbi Spitzer to see if the shul had any records or anything available that might.
I'm pretty sure they do.
Okay, cool. I might be in touch with the shul in the coming days.
Oh, good, great.
Okay. Okay, cool. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.